Firstly, first up, thank you to everybody for joining from the 10 countries worldwide. Thank you also to those that have helped set it up, particularly Eva in Ireland, who's done the hard yards to bring us all together. It's not been simple, it's not been easy, and we span a whole heap of time zones. I think some of you, it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and here in Australia it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So if the Australians are slower than usual, it's about the time of the day. It's not because we're from Australia. It's the purpose of this is not to make decisions about globally. It's not for any of us to make judgments about what everybody's doing. It's about to share information and to share where we're up to. And the two questions that each country representative has been asked to speak to is, where are your sheds at right now? And what do you see on the horizon for sheds in your country? I think those questions were circulated. The reason I gave, we figured we'd keep it simple. If we just left it completely open, people say, what's this discussion about? And I guess we figured that this will be probably the first of a number of discussions. We're thinking at this stage, maybe in 3 months' time, we might reconvene and we might focus on some of the themes that might come out today. Without preempting what people will talk about, clearly COVID has had a huge impact on sheds in every country. And it might be, that's one of the things that comes out. But every country is different. Everybody's dealing with sheds in a different way, both at the coalface and in terms of the way the sheds are organised across each nation. So this is a learning experience. Please participate with that, with a generosity of spirit that goes with learning. So with that in mind, the idea is that people will be given 5 minutes each. Well, each nation will give them 5 minutes each to focus on those themes. If you've got a watch, please look at your watch before you start and try and keep the 5 minutes. I've got a timer here that will say 5 minutes. Eva has got a dump button, but hopefully we won't have to use it. If when your 5 minutes is up, or more or less, we'll give you a bit of a warning, and I'll wave maybe like this. It's not that I'm being rude, it's just that if someone goes for 10 minutes, we're all going to be here for a lot longer, and we're going to have no time on the end to have a bit of a chat to pull it all together. This is not a decision-making forum, I stress. This is a number of well-placed individuals in each country who we think are in a position to talk about these issues, about where we're at and what might be on the horizon. So if people are happy to proceed on that basis, let's get started. The first on the list is the United States, and I believe with Mark online, and also the two Genesis. I'll leave it to you to work out how you want to sort out your 5 minutes, but I reckon it might be Mark we start with. Thank you. Yeah, I might just have to wait for Eva to unmute you, or you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, everyone, for having us here today. To give you some background on how it all started for us, it was an Irish guy named John Eboy that got the Americans involved in this. He had us on the phone back in November of 2016, asking us to bring the movement to the US. And we were crazy enough to say, okay, we'll do this. Here it is 5 years later. And it has been an experience. The first couple of years, it was like a hobby on the side. Then midway through 2018, it started getting serious. At this point, I have to tell you, it's a very serious full-time job. How COVID has affected us through this time, there are some sheds. We only have 23 sheds in the US. We would have much more. We had 7 projects going from Vermont to San Francisco in the beginning of 2020. They all flatlined due to COVID. But the other side of this coin is we developed 4 more sheds during COVID. So those were just people that were going to do it no matter what, and it was done. These days, what we're finding out is the US government doesn't have much thought about men or men's health. We are working with a Men's Health Network out of Washington, D.C. that is trying to pass some bills on developing a men's health department within the government itself. Going forward, I would have to say that we have tried to pull it together. Steve Werner, with his shed in Florida, has started Zoom meetings, started them about a year and a half ago, which not only kept his shed together, but it brought in people from other countries. And it's quite something now. Every week they do something, and he's got 25 to 40 people on there as a rule. We also started our newsletter, our USMSA newsletter, that at the end of this, if everybody could send me their email addresses, I'll make sure if you're not getting them, that you will be getting them, okay? But, you know, some days it's very satisfying. Some days it's pushing a rock up a hill. And that's where we're at. I know I haven't taken my whole 5 minutes, but if you have any questions, maybe we could use the rest of the time for that.
Thank you, Mark. Did Janice, either of the Janices, want to add anything there? Is there anything that you can think of, Janice McDowell or Janice Waltman?
No, I feel Mark put it succinctly for us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I've got one question for him. I thought, Mark, that you started off in the Vanderhoof men's shed in northern British Columbia in Canada.
Well, that's how I got involved back in 2014, Doug. I helped put the second shed together in British Columbia, in Canada.
In Canada.
And that's how somehow Barry picked that up in his book. And I think John Evoy picked that up. And that's how I got involved. So yeah, I've been involved since 2014. But really, from 2014 to 2016, I was doing some other businesses and so forth. So,
Look,
thank you, Doug.
Mark, one quick. Can I have a quick
you.
question for Mark? Janice and the 2 Janices, are you both volunteers or are you paid staff?
Mark and I are doing this on volunteer, and then Janice Altman is, we're paying her for her services.
Thank you.
Okay.
But she's doing the newsletter. She's the editor of our newsletter, and
And
that
the
is all
newsletter.
volunteer.
Yes.
Could I thank the 2 Janices and Mark for being online. We really look forward to working with you down the track, and where, as you know, everyone's standing right behind you. Every place deals with it differently, and the US is a very different place to Australia, to Ireland, to Scotland and Ireland. So it's just, you know, you're doing a great job. So, and you've really had a hard time with COVID. So we might go on to me. Me sitting in Denmark, and I'll invite me to take the floor. So you'll now unmute Mark, I think.
I'm on.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having us. I'm here with my coworker, Oliver, who is a new employed in our Forum of Men's Health. And I can start in the same way as Mark did it. We also was phoned up by John Evoy back in 2014 and was invited to come to Ireland and visit the men's shed over there, and was very inspired. But we wanted to, from our perspective, make some meeting places for men where there was a healthy frame for them to come into. And we saw that there was some similarity to men's shed. So therefore, we made the concept men's meeting place, what is the name in Denmark, because men's shed in Denmark will somehow be translated to men's shit, and we won't go around saying that. So, so therefore we call it men's places. Since 2014 and up till now, we have established 34 places in Denmark, which is around the whole country. And at the moment, of course, like you, we have been challenging with the COVID, but we were really fortunate that in 2019, we had a project where we worked together with 14 of our meeting places on a project bringing the men out in the nature and learning them how to do activities out in the nature. Therefore, when COVID came, a lot of our men's shed got out in the nature and meet outside. So actually, when we opened up the country again, all our meeting places was fully equipped with the men. So we haven't been, of course, they have felt that it was very challenging for them during the COVID, but somehow they have also missed being together, and that had held them together. And we have seen some very, very nice stuff that they had dipped to. They have helped each other during COVID. They have gone grocery shopping for each other, and yes, just to be around each other. Loneliness in Denmark is a big, big topic, and therefore there is a lot of people asking us how we do with the men's shed, and of course, loneliness is a subject we also are talking about here. If we should see into the future for men's shed, at the moment we are working. Oliver is head of our project on how to make the network more sustainable and how to provide the individuals men's shed on how to be providing themselves and not be so dependent on us as the top forum. So that is for our next 3 years to work with that, and we have to open up 5 more places during that period. Today, as a running up for me, we have been visiting a men's shed that has this focus that it's only men who has or have had cancer, and they are located nearby a cancer rehabilitation center, and they are around 50 men who come there, and that is a very inspiring place, and that is also something we would work in the future to maybe have a focus point in a men's meeting place in Denmark that can have maybe a disease focus on diabetes or cardiovascular or any stuff, because we see that the men interact in another way when they have this joint subject. I think that is my 5 minutes, and I would love to have questions for anything. And Oliver, if you have anything that you want to say, please say it.
Oliver.
Oliver, I have a problem with the camera, and I don't. So
No problem. Okay. Could I just thank you, May, for the rest of us. English is our first language, and the Danes are fantastic in English.
Oh.
And I'm not being surprising, but your English is excellent, and I'm just acknowledging that you're working across language as well as across everything else. And your work is quite stunning, and I admire what you've done in Denmark. And I think we all acknowledge some of the great things you've done. And your Learning with Nature initiative, I think, is particularly interesting. And for those who aren't aware of it, you really need to follow up. It was a really interesting development, and I think you've really hit on something I think is quite fascinating, and I think it'll be positive ahead.
Yeah, and I don't know if everybody knows it, but we have in our meeting places a lot of activities, a lot of different activities. There's not all have the facilities to have craft work. Therefore, they are joining in on food cooking and computer making, or and a lot. Everyone is actually doing something in the nature. If it's walking together or biking or just being out. Yeah, we ask them, what do you want to do? And because we want them to be involved, and yeah.
Thank you, Mee. We'll
you.
pass on to New Zealand, and just remind me who we've got, please, from New Zealand.
It's Trevor here. I'm the chairperson of Meanshed New Zealand, and Dave is our secretary of Meanshed New Zealand.
Yep, great, Trevor, and thanks, Dave. Go for it.
Right, well, hi to everybody, and it's great to be part of a wider thing than just in New Zealand and in Australia, and so it is good to be part of it. We started probably in New Zealand about 12 years ago, and there was about 3 or 4 of us through New Zealand who started at different times. In about 2015, Meanshed New Zealand was formed, and that was formed with purely voluntary people. The whole of New Zealand is voluntary orientated. There is no paid workers in it, although there may be the odd shed that does have a paid coordinator on the floor to manage their operation. There are something like 114 sheds that are scattered right throughout New Zealand. Some of them are quite large, and they'll have probably 150 to 170 people, and some of them are quite small that might only have 3 or 4, 6 people at them. So the premise for New Zealand to be a member of New Zealand Meanshed is that the shed must have a legal identity. It also must have a main purpose of their facility is for men's health and well-being, and then they can become members of New Zealand Meanshed. New Zealand Meansheds strives to provide resources for sheds. We do not at any stage tell sheds what they can do or can't do. All we do is gather resources from all around the country, all different experiences from overseas or whatever, and we put them together on our website, and sheds are free to come in and use that material however they wish to. The way in which things grow in New Zealand, we are not government funded. There is no government funded or council funded for any men's sheds in New Zealand. There is no government department for men in New Zealand. There is women's department and government, but not men. So we're purely a grassroots organisation, you could say, that they start up, a group of people see what's happening in a different suburb, maybe a shed started there, they visit it, they get going, and the local councils in many ways give them the opportunity to use land to build a workshop on. Now, all of our facilities are workshop based. They may start at wood and they will move from metal, they go into electronics, they go into a whole raft of activities, but mainly they start with a wood base. It's an activities-based thing. We see our niche market as serving the community our sheds are in. And they serve that by working with other organisations. It may be a preschool, and they build things for preschools, or they fix things for preschools. They may work with primary schools doing a similar thing, or they just do community work around. It may be seating in the community, in parks, or it could be a project where they've come together to build something for the community. They also, many sheds run special programs, holiday programs for children. A lot of them work with Alzheimer's groups, dementia groups. There's a whole raft of organisations out there that are connected with many of the sheds that are around New Zealand. They also run a number of sheds, although it's a men-based organisation. The women attend them, and they run special sessions for women in the evening, maybe one night a week or something, or one slot during the daytime. And that also gives another wide use of a facility. I think the biggest thing that comes from New Zealand that we see in the future is that from our 114 member sheds, I would like to see, and it's a growth thing, that perhaps there's half a dozen to 10 sheds every year coming on board. One of our problems is the cost of land, and particularly in Auckland, the land is very, very expensive. And building is very, very expensive in New Zealand. It's not a cheap thing to do to build a shed. And many of the people who have built sheds just recently have had to raise something like $250,000 or $500,000. And that's come from funding that's available that you can apply for, like lotteries type money, things like that. There are different organisations throughout the country who will give to community groups who need funding to get established. Is there anything, Dave, that you want to add? Just unmute your phone. You have to unmute top right-hand corner of your screen.
Sorry, I was talking with my husband.
That's all right. Yeah, no, I think you've pretty much covered, Trev. Yeah, it's I'm relatively new to the men's shed, so I'm still on a learning curve as well.
I think one of the big things about New Zealand sheds is that we're slightly different from a lot of other things. We don't get any funding. We have to go out and we use our hands, and most of them are self-funded. We do a lot of projects that bring in donations, and that from those donations, then we can extend our facilities, buy more materials and turn the materials around. It's a non-profit organisation. We belong to what is called the Charity Commission. And because of that, we don't pay any taxes. We don't pay, if a council owns the property where the shed has been built on, most of those are very, very small peppercorn rentals or no rental at all. And in some cases, the councils cover the power usage and things like that. So there's a whole raft of things. So I'll just leave it at that. If anybody's got any questions to ask me, I'm more than happy to try and answer them.
There might be one quick question, Trevor. Anybody want to put their hand up and ask a question of Trevor? Can I thank everybody for being on time? Everybody's observing the 5 minutes without me having to play dictator. Could I just say I admire what you people have done with no paid staff in a very spread out nation, to have 140. A network of 140 sheds, and you guys at Menshed New Zealand doing it completely voluntarily. I have a huge admiration for what you've done. So, so well done.
Thank you.
I think now we go to UK. I think it's John. Who else there, John?
Hi, I'm John Mitchell. I'm chairman of trustees of the charity that runs UKMSA, and Charlie Bethel is our paid chief officer. So we'll both have a brief talk. So I've only been chairman for about 18 months, so I can't pretend to have the lengthy background of some of you guys and girls on the call. UK, for all its relatively small geographical size, far smaller than Canada and the US and the rest, has one of the more complicated structures, in the sense there are 4 home nations, several of whom are represented here: England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. That's the 4. Plus we have the Crown dependencies, the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands, which actually suits two separate structures, Guernsey and Jersey. So we have members in the vast majority of those. We don't have any members in Jersey, but we have members and sheds in all of those other areas. We believe, and like a lot of people with how many sheds are there, it's a complicated question sometimes. We think there are around between 750 and 800 sheds across the United Kingdom and the dependencies. About 400 of those are currently members of UKMSA. We aim to have good working relationships with SMSA, IMSA, and the others. And Menshed Cymru were due to be on the call, I think, and I don't see them yet, unless I'm missing something. In terms of obviously the last 2 years, like everyone else, has been a real struggle. I know of many sheds, both north and south of the Scottish borders, who've lost premises and had to find new premises. There's been very relatively small numbers of sheds have opened over the last 18 months. There are a few. So there's plenty still to tax us. If we look at the numbers of sheds in Australia, we think that if you take the numbers of population, the relative population of the UK and Australia, we believe there's about 1,000 sheds in Australia. We think the UK could support around 2,500 to 3,000 sheds. So with 850 open sheds, we've still got some way to go. But there's a huge geographical disparity. Both Scotland and Northern Ireland, for example, are much closer to the level of sheds in terms of sheds per head of the population than England and Wales. And particularly what we see, which you may see in other countries too, is the big cities are massively under-shedded. I could use that very strange term. London, with only 22 sheds and a population of over 8 million, you can see is really not very many sheds at all. I'll pass over to Charlie to talk about some of the other challenges and things we're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks, John. Hello, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I mean, to touch on men to start with, there is a white paper that was, it's all blurred. It's being developed at the moment for the British government. There isn't a strategy for men's health in the UK, and there is a rising discrimination against men that we're seeing more and more, with men's groups being refused and men's sheds being refused properties because they're adjacent to schools, let alone in the premises. So we're seeing more and more of that arise, maybe because of COVID and people are slightly more vocal about their prejudices. We are, as John mentioned, we've got an ambitious target to try and support and facilitate sheds. Like Trevor mentioned, we're there to facilitate, developing networks, which are working really well. And again, our approach there with networks is to support the sheds to develop networks at a local level. And then from that, we also see additional shed growth. We are launching this week on Thursday in the House of Commons a charter for wellbeing in craft and DIY. The purpose of that is to facilitate a connection between the DIY sector and the third sector, where we can help increase health and wellbeing, reduce loneliness, and playing our part in suicide prevention. And we would encourage you all to come onto our website to sign up to the charter. And if it's something that you would like to do, we're partnering with Welsh Mensheds Cymru on this. And we're looking to try and grow that as well. And hopefully with Scotland and Ireland as an all-Irish association, we have shed members in Northern Ireland as well, to really try and push the brand of Men's Sheds. And already one of our partners as a result of this, which is an American company, but has branches all over the world, are looking to rebrand some of their products with Men's Sheds to promote the charter and to get more people engaged in Men's Sheds. So that's the sort of thing that we're trying to do now, is moving into that. And that's how we believe that we're going to help communities get more men's sheds across the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. That's really fascinating, and thank you for the invitation of looking at your charter. I saw your charter of wellbeing about DIY. I think it's really interesting what you're doing, and it's one way of sort of uniting not just sheds but all people who are doing hands-on activities, which we all acknowledge have beneficial effects in terms of connecting people and giving people a purpose and something to do and someone to talk with. I really like what you're doing, and you're a small country, but you do a lot in very diverse places. But what you've actually observed about big cities being undershedded is something we observe in most other countries. I mean, there's not all that many. There's sheds in Melbourne, but there's nowhere near as many. There's actually one small local government area in Western New South Wales where the local politician has actually got 52 sheds in his small rural electorate. And I've often said to him, if he developed a strategy that said, I shed, I vote, he might be able to change the government. But anyway, I'm just thanking you and acknowledging that we're learning a lot from what everyone's talking about. So thank you to John and Charlie. I'm not sure whether we actually got Robert or Simon on. If Robert and Simon are on from Wales, we'll flick to them. If not, Eva, we might.
No, neither of them have come in. Neither of them have come in.
Yeah. Look, it is after hours in Wales. I could say that they're probably home having dinner, but I'm not. Everybody else is in the same boat, so I won't say that. Jason and David, welcome. Good to see you both, and we look forward to what you've got to say.
Yeah, well, good evening. First of all, thanks for giving us the opportunity. It's actually good looking around about to see so many people represented. Can I just start off with saying that we are in Scotland, we concentrate in Scotland. We are not confused with who our members are. We managed to work within Scotland, and we have been, I think, reasonably successful in that. We work shoulder to shoulder whenever possible with any other organisation to try and promote men's sheds, and as everybody's said up to now, men's well-being. But rather than going too much about that, what I'd like to do is introduce a gentleman who I think most of you probably already know, my own CEO, Jason Schroeder. Jason, can you come in and update us, please?
So, David, thanks very much, and good to see some old faces on here and obviously some new ones as well from across the world. I just want to drop in a big thank you to Dr. Neil Bruce, who I believe was the first chairman in New Zealand. And that's how I heard about men's sheds when he was in Scotland and he gave a talk on men's sheds in a local village. If it wasn't for him giving that talk over here, probably Scottish men's sheds wouldn't be around. That was back in 2009. So thank you to him. If he's still connected, Trevor, to the association, tell him I'm asking for him. Situation where we are now in Scotland is we've got a total of 191 groups. We've got 125 open sheds with 66 in development. We have lost some sheds during COVID, but the exciting news is that we've also got more sheds opening than we have lost. So that's really, really good stuff. I was at a shed network meeting today in one of the regions, and a lot of the feedback from those guys is that we're getting a lot of new men coming into the sheds that had never heard of sheds before. The other issue is maybe like all of you, particularly the older age group. In Scotland, we look at an 18 plus age demographic for sheds. The larger percentage is for men over the age of 55. And because of this age group with the COVID story, they are really afraid to leave their homes and come back into the sheds. So what we're finding in our sheds is that the kind of core group, so if you've got 150 membership, you maybe got 25, 30 core guys. Those guys have sort of come back, but the larger part of the membership are still struggling to get back. They're quite afraid to leave the home. So I think that's probably the case across the world. Be good to hear other organisations saying as that's happening in their sheds. Certainly is in ours. The older sheds, sort of 5 years plus, we kind of started the first. I kicked this off in 2009. West Hill, our first shed, opened in 13. Our charity launched in 14 as all volunteers. And then we got the Scottish Government involved with us in 2016. And since then, we've been turned into a business, let's say, with 3 staff full-time now. And we've just employed our first development officer as well, which is very exciting to get that out there. So those sheds that are sort of 5 years and older are pretty stable. But the sheds that are 1 to 2 years old, those are the guys that we find really struggling to get the impetus, and even in themselves amongst their boards, they're kind of COVID tired. And we're having to support them quite a lot, just in conversations really about giving them the confidence to keep going in that respect. Let's see what else is there to tell you. On our side of it, we're very grateful to have our patron, Sir Harry Burns. He was the Chief Medical Officer for Scotland for many, many, many years, a man of very high regard in Scotland, and he is our patron. And having him on board certainly gets the government to look at us in a better light. We've just been through a new election. The party got involved, SNP got back into power, which is a 5 years period. The impact on us is that we've been working with 1 year funding since we started back in 16. And this looks like for the first time, we will be able to get a 3-year funding package with the government. We've obviously also had to build new relationships with a whole lot of new cabinet ministers here, because a lot of them have had a reshuffle during this time. So it's building all those new relationships again. They had a meeting pre-Christmas, went very well with the new ministers. They had a meeting 2 days ago, and we're looking forward to them really understanding what men's sheds and the impact that men's sheds are having. The 4-year research that Dr. Danny Kelly did through Glasgow University with us has made a massive help on the health benefit, as is Barry's book, to get governments to look and go like, this is a serious grassroots movement, people. You need to put a heads up on this. This isn't just a local crafting group, so to speak. So that's very exciting for us as we move forward. Yeah, I think that's about us up to date.
Good, well done, and well done keeping to time, Jason. You mentioned you have a patron. For those organisations that don't have a patron, I mean, I profess a vested interest here. I'm a patron myself of the Australian Association, and quite proudly so. But I think having somebody who is outside of the organisation, but who can speak for the organisation from either as a men's health expert or as something, is often really, really valuable. We found that here, and even the state associations here in Australia have got patrons, and when they've got patrons, it's often very effective. So I'm just throwing it out there for those who haven't thought about it. Yeah, look, the COVID timidity, people being timid coming back who are older, is something I think is coming out as a theme in a lot of places, and you're experiencing it in Scotland. You've also pointed to research, and while research might seem boring, and sometimes it is, it just proves the obvious. Sometimes governments need that research, and what you've done in Scotland is really, really interesting and really positive. So thank you, Jason. Have we got Horder online, Eva, or not?
No, I'm afraid not. He wasn't able to join us this evening, so his apologies.
Okay, for those who don't know, Horder is in Ireland. He was with the Icelandic Red Cross until about a year and a half ago. And although he's outside of Icelandic Red Cross, he's still got a watching brief over the sheds in Ireland. And if you need to make contact with him, I'm happy to send you his contact details, or Eva can, and you can contact him directly. Although they've only got 4 sheds in Iceland per head of population, they've got, and this is not a race, but they've actually got more sheds per head of population than they have in New Zealand. So they've made a huge contribution. For those who don't know, people in Iceland also write more books per head of population than anybody else in the world. So they're a nation of overachievers. So keeping up with the Icelandic is, and particularly speaking the Icelandic language, is apparently very challenging. So I'm just acknowledging that they've done some good work. Doug, it's your turn. Hopefully you've warmed up after your cold evening, and welcome. It's nice to see you again on the screen.
Great to see all you guys. Thank you very much. Men's Sheds has had an interesting start here in Canada. My daughter, who lives 9 hours drive away from me in Saskatoon, called me up one June 2008 and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sitting at my computer." And she'd been at a conference that day and sat with a woman from Australia. And so she called me up and said, "Pull up the site in Australia." I said, "Oh, that looks interesting." And as you know, you always do as your daughters tell you to. She said, "Start one." And that happened really not till really got going in 2011. We started our first men's shed there at that particular time. It's still in operation. Currently, we have 43 men's sheds across Canada, no staff. It's all done by volunteer. And we have absolutely, at a Canadian men's shed level, absolutely no funding whatsoever. We have two different kinds of sheds here, which are interesting. One is what I call simply an independent men's shed, where they do not have a sponsor, but we also have a large number of sponsored men's sheds, especially in larger centers where they couldn't afford to have their own room or building and that kind of thing, but they come under the auspices and under the mandate of a community-based organization. For Canadian men's sheds, we're recently incorporated, believe it or not, and I can hardly understand this, but it's taken a long time. We have no funding, but we're now a not-for-profit organization here in Canada. We do not have charitable status, which makes a big difference. We have an annual general meeting of the Canadian men's sheds coming up the next 6 months. Interesting enough, health in Canada is a provincial or territorial responsibility. So there's no way that we can go to a national minister for health or anything like that, because there are 10 provinces, 3 territories, and also an Indigenous health organization. So actually 14 different organizations all across Canada. So it's not coordinated. Sheds, because of COVID, have been closed down. They're reopening now. Let's hope that a lot more reopen. And as I said, we have 43 sheds at this particular time. That's pretty well it. Anyone got any questions about Canada?
Thanks, Doug. You've got a few minutes up your sleeve. I'm happy if does anyone want to ask Doug any questions. I just wish, Doug, we didn't have states in Australia. It'd be a heck of a lot simpler. I'd quite like your New Zealand model, Trevor, where you've got basically a nation and local government and not much in between. I just wish we'd done that here. Life and politics would be much simpler if we didn't have state governments, but you've got your provinces and they're not going to disappear anytime soon, Doug.
We're very similar to New Zealand, and I just want to mention that because of my daughter, men's sheds came to North America.
Okay, that's great. Any other questions of Doug? You've done. I mean, you've got 43 sheds from in the last 10 years. You've grown very quickly, and it always starts slowly. But I can see from what you've been doing and others have been doing, for example, in British Columbia recently, there's going to be quite a growth in quite a few provinces in the next year or two.
They have funding, by the way, through the United Way in British Columbia, but does not go across Canada. We also have an additional challenge in that we have a large French-speaking a group at this particular time. And I hope to be able to develop that in the next two or 3 years, completely separate from whatever else we're doing in English-speaking Canada.
Yeah, look, I do understand that, Doug, and in a sense, you're the only nation on the. I guess Ireland, you've got some Gaelic speakers, and Scotland's got people who don't speak English, and Wales certainly they don't. But you've got an interesting issue in relation to your francophone. Thank you.
But I will be coming home at some time soon. I'm in Toronto, so a bit pretty far away from Doug. Yeah, I'm actually live in Northern Ireland, although I'm chairman of the Irish Men's Sheds Association. So we would be somewhat involved in the north. We're part of the UK, just for the people who explain. But most of our funding is from Ireland, from the southern half of Ireland. We are funded by the Health Board. So we actually have 460 sheds in Ireland for a population of 6 million. So we've got the highest concentration of sheds in the world. Sheds, the numbers will go up and down. But at the moment, I think that it's about enough. We have enough sheds, I think, at the minute. We don't really need any more. Well, sheds will close, sheds will open, but the numbers are pretty good. The individual sheds are autonomous. They self-fund themselves. But we do, particularly in the north, we do have sheds that get funding from different organizations. And in my own shed, for example, in Rostrevor, we're fully funded by our local council. But that's unusual. We have a number of full-time staff. It has been, I think, as many as 10. And Eva, who you can see on here, would be both full-time staff, and it is our CEO. And we run, I guess what we do is we advise sheds, we advocate for them, and we run health programs. That's the main things that we do. We're very happy with how sheds are going here, but we've got big plans for the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now pass over to Enda, and he can let you know about everything else that we do.
Thanks, Eamon. Hello, everybody. And thanks to Eva and Barry and David for setting this up this evening. So I suppose just to follow on from Eamon, just a couple of kind of points, I suppose, right where we are currently. Sheds are trying to open up after COVID. Lots of challenges there. We would estimate there's about 60 to 70 sheds that are really going to struggle to open up and probably won't. There are a number of kind of reasons for that. You have sort of COVID fatigue, I guess. The average kind of age of a person in a shed in Ireland is 69 years of age. I suppose lots of people with their own kind of health issues and that. What we're finding among those 70 sheds is they tend to be slightly younger sheds. They tend to be sheds where I suppose there's probably one person who is maybe the key holder, and that individual is probably 2 years older than they were when COVID started, and they maybe, through their own health deterioration, not necessarily relating to COVID, just to their own health deterioration, find themselves in a position where they're not able to, I suppose, give to the shed as they were prior to COVID. So there are certainly leadership issues in a lot of those sheds, and there's, as I say, there's 60, 70 that's going to really struggle to open them up, and that's going to be a big challenge for us as an organisation. We've had some meetings at government level over the last couple of weeks, but I think at this stage everything is within the context of the 2023 budget is the way that it would seem. Eamon has said, yeah, correctly, there's on the island there's about 460 sheds. And one of the challenges for us as an organisation is that's split over 2 different jurisdictions, and the organisation is predominantly based in the Republic of Ireland. I think looking at the organization where it's at in terms of its evolution. And I think a lot of organizations, in my experience, go through an evolution, and where we are as an organization is probably pretty much where you kind of expect us to be. To move the organization on and to move on the sheds, and I suppose how sheds are seen is really down to us as an organization empowering men, I think, within sheds, empowering men locally, empowering each shed to take on the issues within the context of pre-budget, is the way that it tends to work here in Ireland. And that we intend to go on a pretty big pre-budget consultation over the next couple of months, and then look at empowering each shed to lobby locally within its own. The TDs are like MPs, they're called in some countries, but they're our local representatives who sit within Parliament. And for us to move this issue on, I think we have to turn it into a national political issue, and that's the only way we're going to do that. Really, is from ground up, and that's a big task. And we have about 6-7 staff in the organization, and that seems to be a good bit comparison to some other organizations that are on here this evening. But certainly we will definitely struggle to make it into a national issue, but that's where the future is going to lie for the men's sheds in Ireland, to ensure that we get the kind of funding coming into the sheds that the sheds deserve, and to ensure that the organisation gets the kind of funding that we require to provide the service the sheds are looking for at local level. So I do think, obviously where you lie within the political cycles is very important. The kind of issues that we're looking at globally at the moment, COVID, wars going on, and all kinds of things that impact on the economies are really worrying kind of issues for us at the moment. But we would certainly hope that things would stay looking good for us, that we get a reasonable crack at budget 2023 and try and bring the kind of funding both into the sheds and into the organisation that we require. So not sure if we've kind of covered off all the issues. I'm conscious of my my stopwatch here that's gone over 6 minutes at the moment, but happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Eamon, and thank you, Enda. That's a comprehensive coverage. We might come back if there's any questions later. We'll certainly have time on the end, because without conversation, without Wales, we've probably got a bit of time up our sleeves, so we'll be able to do that on the end. As you say, you've got the highest concentration of sheds anywhere in the world. I hesitate to call it shed heaven, but certainly my research shows that you've been hit particularly hard. I mean, everyone's been hit hard, but the Irish sheds have been hit very hard, I suspect. And your median age, as you say, towards the late 60s means that there's a lot of who are reluctant to come into the shed because of health concerns. And as you say, you're going to lose a few sheds mainly because of that. Our thoughts are with you as you come out of this pandemic. I'm not sure we've got David Helmets with us, but we've certainly my friend Paul Sladden, who's sitting about 200 kilometres from where I'm sitting in Australia, up in Bonnie Doon. How Paul?
The birds are singing, the sun is about to rise, so things are quite serene here in Bonnie Doon at the moment. Thanks, Barry. Fantastic to see everybody, and thank you to those responsible for getting this happening. So Eva, Barry, David, everybody else, thank you very much for that. I'll be brief and then I'll hand over to David. We're very lucky here in Australia in that we do get strong bipartisan government support on a national level, and most of the states, the majority of the states, do get support from their state governments for the promotion of men's sheds in their respective states. We've got roughly 1,200 sheds around Australia. Yes, COVID has had an impact. Being such a large country, it depends which state you're in. The COVID sort of went from state to state to state. And so over in the West, they're now experiencing what the eastern states experienced over the last 2 years, but because they locked themselves down and shut their borders, they still don't open until later this week, actually. They've sort of been a little bit isolated, but COVID has now hit them. And yes, we are also experiencing some hesitancy from the older population in returning to the shed because of health concerns. But thankfully, that's that's getting less and less. We feel for our northern states at the moment, in Queensland in particular, who are under flood, and New South Wales. We've had sheds that have been completely flooded out, wiped out. It's very hard to get flood insurance. So it's going to be a challenge for many of those sheds. Just on the political side of it, as Enda was saying, we also have a federal election this year, very soon, but we do enjoy bipartisan support. But David and I are meeting with the incumbent government later this week, and we will certainly be putting in our election bid for that. But I will now hand over to David Helmets.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. It's good to see everyone there. Just looking around, I think I've met at least half of you in my travels around the years. And unfortunately, the last 2 years, like everyone else, haven't been able to do that. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll start traveling around and meeting face to face again. Just following up from Paul, where we currently sit at around 1,180 men sheds, close enough to the 1,200, Paul, around Australia. And that's been very stable for the last 3 years, I suppose, 3-4 years. In some ways, we're kind of reached a saturation point. There's not too many new men sheds opening in Australia anymore in comparison to the early days. I say the early days in that 2010 to 13 period. We've been government funded for 12 years now. We've been in existence for 15 years, but 12 years of that has been under a government service agreement, providing services for the federal government. That really hasn't changed, that level of funding, in comparison to the numbers of growth over those 12 years. We've gone up 300-400% now. Our funding certainly isn't reflective of that. But today we do employ 11 staff. We're a support system for the sheds. I described to Leipia a inbound call for actually me and the telephone. They just ring constantly from the sheds on a whole range of subjects. We have noticed though the IT literacy rates amongst Australian shedders has risen dramatically, especially I think COVID was a contributor to that. We currently get around 17,000 hits on our website per month, downloading information through there, which was up by about 7,000 over the last couple of years. Of those sheds, we estimate around 90 to 95% of them are fully independent, self-incorporated entities. Most of the sheds occupy government land. And yes, there has been a lot of government money put into sheds, but we insist, we're very cautious of it not becoming a grant-reliant culture. But the sheds still have to work and build that, contribute to that themselves. We know of some sheds that have raised $250,000 just out of cooking sausages at barbecues. One shed claims it's probably got the world record. It cooked 10 tonne of sausages in 12 months and raised that money. As I said, those numbers are stable. We don't lose too many sheds. Unfortunately, in the coming days, we know of a few that we have lost yesterday. And there'll probably be sadly a few more over the few coming days. And it's usually the ones we do lose have been through natural disasters more than failure as a men shed. So we've become very much sustainable to a degree. We're only reliant about 52% now on government funding. The rest of the funding we source independently from the government. And there's that big question about if we were fully sustainable, who's going to pay for it? It would be counterproductive to the purpose of men sheds. It would end up being the user paying for the services, and the cost of the joining a shed would therefore rise, and it wouldn't be socially inclusive everybody. So it will always need that level of government support. Just on the politics side, as Paul was saying, the Australian male health in 2010, and in 2018, the government released a male health strategy too, which pretty much, for the next 5 years, I think that runs to 2023. And in that, we have a strong health focus, but we've separated those brands a little from men's sheds to men's health. We have partnered with Healthy Male. We used to have 70 different health who manages all those other 70 contributors to our male health programs. I think that's about it for us. I think I've covered about everything, Paul.
I would.
Thank you, Dave. Sorry,
Barry. I just wanted to say one thing. If it wasn't for David Helmets, I'm not sure the U.S. MSA would exist at this point. But for his advice and counsel, and I just want to thank him in front of everybody for everything he's done.
No worries, Mark.
Thank you, David.
thank you, Mark, for that. I think there's a lot of. I mean, I think everybody in all of the organisations has done a lot of heavy lifting for other people over the years, and I know that your budget doesn't stretch to doing stuff internationally. You're not allowed to go winging across the world to support, but a lot of this has been done with a lot of us voluntarily. So thank you to AMSA for that. I was going to see if anybody wanted to any quick questions to either David or Paul. No. Goodo. I think we've been through each of the nations and looked at what's actually happening with sheds right now and what people see on the horizon. But I just thought at this stage, it being about with maybe 20 minutes to go before we wrap it up, is there anything else that people want to put on the table or questions that you want to raise to other people? And also looking ahead, what if we do, assuming we do meet again in 3 months' time, what sorts of things that you think we might focus on given what's come out today? Put your hand up and make some suggestions. Thanks. Paul. Thanks, Paul. And then Mark.
Thanks, Barry. I know this is a men's shed forum, but I'm just interested to hear from maybe New Zealand and Ireland, in terms of the rise of women's sheds, if you're seeing that as a urgent issue in your countries.
Who would you like to go to first, Paul?
Trevor.
Yep. Bring this up. At our executive meeting last night, the idea of a women's shed was talked about. There are, in fact, in New Zealand, about 3 women's sheds scattered throughout the country. women on the whole are not members of sheds, but attend sheds. And there are a lot of what are called, it might be like New Brighton Community Men's Shed. It services a community. Although it's a men's shed and set for men, there are slots where women can come in and work. And most sheds don't see that as a problem, although some sheds are strictly just men's based. The idea of a woman's shed, they're actually using the facility of a men's shed when the men aren't using it. So it's making good use of a facility that is community, full of community. I see a problem with it, although it may be encroaching upon the ideas of what men's sheds are about, as if women attend a shed and there's men there, the men have who attend the shed have to say yes or no, not the hierarchy of the shed saying it is going to happen. And I think you've always got to remember that the shed was established for the well-being and health and well-being of men. And as long as that is upheld, then I don't see a problem attending a shed. It could be at the same, it depends on how that shed wants to operate it. See a problem with being established, because I used to teach night for 30 years, 2 hours on each night. And the majority of that night school teaching was in fact to women. It was not. So and that was, I used to be part of a network of community education right through New Zealand. And I coordinated half of Canterbury in doing that job. Women are very, very active within the shed, of making things. There are some very, very highly skilled people. Why not have a facility for them? I don't see a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor. It's not so much of women participating in men's sheds. Here in Australia, we're seeing separate buildings and solely dedicated to women in women's sheds. And David, is he still around? About 30 Australia-wide at the moment. Yep.
Yeah, we've got about 30 odd at the moment. But a lot of sheds are evolving, they're becoming women's sheds and men's sheds in the one facility as well. That's becoming a bit like what Trevor was saying there. They've become multi-shed facilities.
If I could just throw in there briefly, David, the women's shed movement here in Australia has become pretty organised just in the last 6 months as COVID has stopped.
Yes.
They've actually, coinciding with International Women's Day in March, they've actually got a women's shed week. And they've got a slogan which is called, they're using your term in New Zealand, Trevor, sheddies, and they've called it SHEDDIES, so it's sheedies. It's very interesting the way it's all transforming. In the end, men's sheds won't decide what women's sheds do. They'll do whatever they choose to do in a public domain. But I'm just observing they're getting very organised. I think they currently estimate that they've got 22 active sheds that are open. They've got 22 others which are either in abeyance or opening. I mean, I've created a database of women's sheds, and I estimate there's probably 60 which have been open at some time, but several of them sort of said they're open and ended up falling over when COVID came. But I do believe there's a lot of interest. On my own website, I noticed that the number of hits about women's sheds run at about 6 to 1, which means that someone's looking at the women's shed stuff. And I said to my daughter, this a whole lot of women looking at men's sheds. She said, no, this is men looking at women's sheds. are doing. That's probably women looking at your site and saying, what are they doing? That could be women, but you don't know who's looking. But I'm just saying there is a lot of interest here in Australia. But on the positive side, I think you've noticed Nell and others, David, in Australia are looking to the men's shed and the men's sheds.
Yeah, they're using a lot of our resources and that, and it's just changing the wording. There's no difference between a women's shed and a men's shed. It's just the way, it's just two letters that they're changing. A lot of them, all the operational ones access our insurance scheme. So, yeah, with them, there's no point in duplication, as I've always said.
I'm thinking of being in the UK, go or about what you're doing with that DIY thing. Right now in the UK, the DIY things is just as relevant for women who need somewhere to go, something to do and something to talk with. They're not men's sheds, they're women's sheds, but it's obviously a legitimate way of doing
What's
stuff.
the Irish
And
situation?
it's certainly growing.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I'd like to. Yeah, there are some sheds in Ireland. The thing is, in Ireland, we already have a number of women's organisations which do similar things. For example, the Irish Country Women's Association and the Women's Institute, but they would sort of concentrate on crafts and baking and things like that. But we have had, there are some sheds in Ireland, Enda can fill you in on the numbers, or maybe Eva, and there is an interest in them. And, you know, I think the general attitude is, yeah, the men, I think the majority of men would be very happy to allow women to, we would have a separate organization, but we would share premises with them. In other words, it would be our premises, but we would allow women to use them when we're not using it. For example, my own shed it's a full-time building for ourselves, so, but we don't use it all the time. So, and that would be a lot of sheds are like that. So, and you could sort of go back in as well.
Yeah, it certainly is an issue that is growing over the last couple of years. I suppose typical kind of Irish thing, just the first thing people do is split, of course. So you have the women's shed, you have she sheds, and you have sister sheds. And I've got a number of very recently contacts from all three organizations. And, you know, when you ask them what's the difference, they say, oh, we're completely different from the other crowd, you know. When you go on your website, you know, my eyesight's failing, of course, but I certainly can't really see what the difference is. But at a recent meeting we had with the Minister for Rural and Community Affairs, she raised the issue with us, and her point was, well, you know, are they going to all start coming to me looking for money? Like, because if they do, I ain't going to fund 3 different organizations. So, you know, you go and tell them to get their act together, you know. And we said, well, no, you go and tell them to get their act together. we have enough rows going on without taking another one. But yeah, so it's definitely on the increase. The kind of local funding organizations here in Ireland, most of them are called, say, local development companies or partnership areas. They would be of the view that there are, back in the kind of 90s and that in Ireland, there was a big kind of growth in women's groups, and they're of the view that, look, this is just a kind of a re-emergence of women's groups in a different kind of context, but they're doing the same thing. You know, what goes on within the group is the same as it was kind of back then, you know. So it definitely is on the increase. I think, as Eamon has said, as an organization, we certainly share our experiences, and you know, hopefully show them some shortcuts if they want to. But I think it's a separate organization, really, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for the question. It's a really timely and pertinent one. Thank you, David, too, for your comments. Anybody else want to put anything on the table for a brief chat? Mark.
Along with your conversation on women in sheds, we have, out of 23 sheds, we have 3 that have been opened by women. So that's about 13%. We'll see if that continues along the way. But what I really want to ask everybody is one of our biggest challenges is finding motivated men to start sheds. 97% of them want to join sheds over here, and 3% come to us and say, oh yeah, we'll start a shed. And then 50% of those fall out, basically. Have any of you experienced the same thing? And if you have, how have you solved that?
Right, can I go? Can I make a start on that one, Mark?
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I notice in the UK is, and others may see similar things in other countries, is that the people who I come from a long-term background as a scout leader, volunteer over 20 years. And I've met a considerable number of people in sheds who come from a similar background, either in scouting or in some other voluntary organisation. Rotary, Rotaract, Lions, those kinds of organisations. Now, other people may have a very different. And I think that's one of the things is you've got to find partners or perhaps target people who've been with those kind of organisations who've perhaps got that voluntary ethos. That's my thoughts anyway.
Okay.
Did anyone else? David, did you want to throw anything in there? David Hellmans?
Yeah. Well,
and then we'll go to me. Thanks,
Yeah.
David.
Just as you know, as well as I do, Barry and Paul, historically in Australia, if you look at the first, say, 200 sheds from 2005 to 2010, you can safely say that the majority of them were actually started by women. Some of you probably heard me talks over the years. I've kind of joked about that. If you left it up to us blokes, we wouldn't have done it. But it was usually women in community development roles that were looking for opportunities for men within those roles that they were working in. I know that doesn't solve your problem, Mark, but maybe look at that community development sector, which in Australia was predominantly women working in those roles, that kicked a lot of the men's shed movement forward.
We will, David.
Yeah. Me and then Trevor.
Yeah, the way we do it in Denmark, because we have the same problem when some men just come and say we want to start up. That is very, I don't know, it's not sorry, my English is not that good. But when we have a good start, we often start up together with a partner from a municipality, from their health department in the municipalities. And what we bring to the table is that we can tell them what's in it for you. When you have men that has been through rehabilitation for cancer or just be in the health sector, and they have been there for maybe like at a course from 8 weeks, and what do you send them out to? The same as they come from. Therefore, if you start up a men's shed together with us, you can take your citizens and give them the opportunities to go over to a men's meeting place afterward and have a community with other men. So on that kind of goal for them is to help their men out, and therefore they have a meaning by starting it up. So it's for us it's about finding those partners, and that is often in the municipality, or as we also is a new group we are working together with the unions, when men are ending their jobs, where do they go? And when we work together with them, they also have a goal that to provide the men's shed with the men they have in the union. So that is really working for us because we can't do it alone. We are only me and Oliver, and yeah.
Thank you, mate. That's really useful. Trevor, did you want to throw something in for New Zealand?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw something in that we've divided the country up into 6 regions, and when a community looks towards starting a shed, is that they approach a regional rep in that area, and we attend public meetings. Every shed that's started has a driver. There's somebody in that community who drives the starting of a shed. And it's if you've got one person who's enthusiastic, it's a matter how infectious that can be on a group of people. And that's the key to it, is to find that one person within a community. It won't start by New Zealand Men Shed saying, here's a suburb, we're going to make it, we're going to start a shed here. It doesn't work that way. It's about the community finding their feet with to start a shed. This is where we've done a lot of work, and the reps in New Zealand have done a lot of work of visiting these key people who wish to start a shed and support them all through the venture. And that gets it off the ground quite successfully. But it's having there's every organization has a driver. And if you look at the people I'm looking at now, each of you would be a driver. Whether you recognize that or not, you would be a driver within your organization. David in Australia there, I see him as being a driver. I went many years ago to Tasmania to a conference, and I remember David on stage talking. He was the driver. So it needs a person in every community who is a driver. And if a person has come forward and said, we wish to make a men shed in our community, I'm pretty certain you've found the driver. I think it's a key issue.
Did anybody else want to throw something in about the challenge of finding somebody to shed? Paul? Yep.
Yeah, it's not so much as finding somebody to start a shed, but one thing that we are experiencing, and I'm sure other countries are the same, is that succession planning. So once you get a shed established, and the people who were involved at the beginning, they're not getting any younger, and they want to move on, finding somebody to step up, that where I've observed there's a hesitancy. Yes, I want to go to the shed and I want to do things in the shed, but I can't be bothered with the running of the shed or the leadership of the shed. That's an issue which I think we will all face if we're not facing it already. So sorry, it doesn't answer your question, Mark, sorry.
To me, you've got your hand up. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to say next time when we meet up, at the moment, Oliver is actually doing seeking in on our men to find out who are the men who is joining our men shed, and why are they there, and what is the health status of the men. So next time when we meet up, we can maybe give you a view of what the men in Denmark are, because we are seeking in to see which men doesn't we see in the men shed, and how can we bring them in. That is our next goal, that is to see the kind of men we don't see and how can we get them into our sheds. So that is, yeah, we don't know who they are yet, but we have an idea, but yeah.
Thank you, May. I think with that, I just looked at the time. We should be pulling it together. It's just a couple
I
of
do
minutes.
have to go in a second.
Well, yeah,
School time.
David has to go take his son to school.
We
Paul
have to go to bed in Denmark.
I have to have my coffee, and some of you need to go to bed. I'll just pull it together briefly and say your generosity in joining this has been incredible. Thank you. I'm assuming that Eva will send out money to everybody who's participated.
No problem. No problem. I'll get.
Beer is legal currency in Australia and Ireland.
And in the UK.
And in the UK. Everywhere.
Everybody's been very generous, not only with your time, but with your honesty and your ideas. I look forward to us having, if everybody's happy about it, having another conversation down the track. I'm assuming, Eva, that you'll circulate a recording, a link to a recording of this that people can share. with your organisation or use as you might. It's very likely that this conversation will go completely viral because we're all so engaging and interesting. Look, thanks again, particularly to David and Eva, who hatched this idea. But while David's done quite a bit of the work, it's really Eva in Ireland who's really pulled it together. And I admire what you've done. Thank you to the people in Ireland. Thank you to your organisation, the Irish Men's Sheds Association. This is above and beyond what you are paid to do. So with that, I just like to say thank you. Does anybody want to make any final comments? I can see people are on their text message saying thank you as they leave. Did anyone say anything finally, because we've got a minute or two to go?
Can I just jump in? You may remember that 2 years ago we were going to have a gathering, a massive gathering in Ireland, which was going to where people come from all over the world as well as from all over the island. We're still planning to do something. We don't know. Eva would be and Enda would know more about the coordination of that. But we do, whenever everybody's able to meet up again, we do plan to have another massive gathering.
There is a reasonably small gathering, but there's a national gathering here in Australia in just 1 month at the end of April here in Albury. So we can get together back here and so there'll probably be around 100 people, David and Paul, maybe, in Albury.
End of this month. It's the end of this month, Barry. The end of March.
We're in March now, are we? Yeah.
We are, yes.
Yeah. It's still only February here.
It's still February here.
When you're retired, every day is Saturday, Paul, and I don't know what the month. So, look, thanks again to everybody. Thank you for your generosity, your sense of humour, your patience, and good luck with what everybody does. And I look forward to chatting 3 months down the track. So let's lock it in.
Thanks. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.